I'd spent 15 years cleaning the offices of Vertex Technologies, watching from the shadows as the company grew from a scrappy startup into a $200 million tech powerhouse. Every night, I'd empty their trash bins, vacuum their plush carpets, and wipe down the glass conference tables where million-dollar decisions were made. To them, I was invisible. Just Manuel Reyes, the night janitor who barely spoke English. What they didn't know was that I spoke 5 languages fluently, held an MBA from an overseas university, and had been investing nearly every penny of my modest salary into their company stock since the day they went public. It wasn't that I was hiding my background deliberately. It was simply that no one had ever bothered to ask. In their world, a janitor was just a janitor, a function, not a person with dreams, intelligence, or ambition. My investment strategy had been simple. Live frugally, save aggressively, and invest consistently in a company whose inner workings I understood better than almost anyone. While executives came and went, I remained, observing patterns, listening to late-night conversations people had when they thought no one was around, and reading discarded documents that revealed the company's true health beyond the polished quarterly reports. My first stock purchase had indeed been modest, just $5,000, nearly all my savings at the time. But year after year, I increased my position, especially when I knew the stock was undervalued. During the financial crisis of 2008, when panic selling drove Vertex's stock to record lows, I took out a second mortgage on my small home and invested everything. The executives were buying vacation homes. I was buying their company, piece by quiet piece. By 2023, Vertex Technologies had reached a critical juncture. Their groundbreaking security software had captured significant market share. But mismanagement and excessive executive compensation had eroded profits. The founding CEO had retired, replaced by Elliot Warner, a slick salesman with a Harvard MBA and expensive tastes, but limited technical understanding of the company's products. Under Warner's leadership, the focus shifted from innovation to cost-cutting. Talented developers were laid off while the executive team expanded. The company's stock had stagnated for 3 years despite the booming tech market. Longtime employees whispered about their concerns, but publicly, Warner projected unwavering confidence. I watched it all unfold as I emptied his trash can each night, finding discarded presentations about declining product quality and growing customer complaints. I saw the emails he printed and then discarded about competitor advances that threatened Vertex's market position. And most tellingly, I noticed how the executives were quietly selling their personal stock holdings while telling employees and shareholders to keep faith. Something needed to change, but as a seemingly powerless janitor, what could I do? The answer came when I learned of a vulnerability few others recognized: the company's ownership structure. Vertex's founding CEO had maintained a 40% ownership stake, kept in a family trust. Upon his retirement, rumors circulated that the shares would be sold to provide for his comfortable retirement. The board, loyal to Warner, planned to have the company buy back these shares gradually to prevent any outsider from gaining significant influence. What they didn't know was that I had established a relationship with the founder years earlier. On quiet nights when he worked late, we'd occasionally chat. First about simple things, then gradually about our families, our backgrounds, and eventually the company itself. I never revealed the extent of my stock holdings, but he came to know me as more than just the janitor. When he decided to sell his shares, he contacted me discreetly. "Manuel," he said during our phone call, "I've watched Warner and his team run my company into the ground. The board won't stand up to him. I need a buyer who cares about Vertex's future, not just its quarterly profits." I took a deep breath. What if I found that buyer? He chuckled. "That would be quite something. The shares are valued at $87 million at current market price. And if someone could meet that price?" There was a pause. "Manuel, are you saying what I think you're saying?" "Let me make some calls," I replied. What the founder didn't know was that over 15 years, my initial investment had grown substantially. Additionally, I had helped several family members and friends from my community invest in Vertex based on my insights. Collectively, our holdings had reached nearly 20% of the company. With the founder's 40%, we could take control. I established an investment vehicle, Sierra Vista Partners, and pulled resources from my network. A sympathetic bank provided financing for the remainder, secured against the very shares we were purchasing. Within 30 days, the deal was complete. Sierra Vista Partners acquired the founder's entire stake, giving us effective control of Vertex Technologies. No announcement was made. No regulatory filings were required yet due to the structure of the transaction. The board and Warner remained oblivious that the company's ownership had fundamentally changed, which brings me to the shareholders' meeting that would change everything. As a shareholder, I had every right to attend the annual meeting, though I'd never exercised that right before. I registered under my own name, Manuel Reyes, and arrived wearing my only suit, purchased specifically for this occasion. The executives' reaction when they saw me enter the hotel ballroom was immediate and visceral. Warner's smile froze on his face as he nudged his CFO, Gerald Thompson. "What's the janitor doing here?" I overheard Thompson whisper as I walked past. Warner forced a smile. "Probably owns 10 shares. Everyone's an investor these days." I took a seat in the back row and observed quietly as shareholders filtered in. A few long-term investors nodded politely in my direction, recognizing me from my years of service in the building, but most ignored me entirely. As the meeting was about to begin, Thompson approached me, his expensive cologne arriving seconds before he did. "Mr. Reyes, isn't it?" he said with a condescending smile. "I didn't realize you were a shareholder." "For 15 years, I replied simply. He raised an eyebrow. "Well, that's commendable. Small investors are the backbone of American capitalism, aren't they? How many shares do you own, if you don't mind my asking?" "Enough to be here," I answered. His smile tightened. "Of course. Well, enjoy the meeting. But you might find some of the discussion a bit," he searched for the right word, technical. As he walked away, I heard him mutter to another executive, "Look, it's the janitor investor. Probably scraped together enough for a few shares." The boardroom erupted in quiet laughter. I maintained my composure, focused on what was about to unfold. Warner called the meeting to order with his typical flourish, presenting a rosy picture of the company's position despite mediocre financial results. He outlined expansion plans that would require significant capital investment and proposed a new executive compensation package that would substantially increase his own pay despite the stagnant stock price. During the question period, a few institutional investors raised concerns about declining margins and increasing customer churn, which Warner dismissed with practiced corporate speak about transitional phases and strategic repositioning. When no one else raised their hand, I did. The room fell silent as Warner reluctantly acknowledged me. "Yes, mister," in the back. "Reyes," I supplied. "Manuel Reyes." I could see Warner struggling to maintain his professional demeanor. "Yes, Mr. Reyes, your question?" The company has spent $42 million on executive compensation over the past 2 years while reducing R&D spending by nearly 30%. During this same period, our main competitor has doubled their development budget and released 2 major product updates to R1. Could you explain how this strategy supports long-term shareholder value? The precision of my question, and the data it contained, created a palpable tension in the room. Warner hadn't expected this level of insight from the night janitor. "Well," he stammered slightly, "executive talent is our most valuable asset, and retention requires competitive compensation. As for R&D, we focused on efficiency rather than raw spending numbers. Yet customer satisfaction scores have dropped from 92% to 76% in 18 months, I continued. And the average tenure of software engineers has declined from 4 years to 17 months. Warner's face darkened. "Mr. Reyes, with all due respect, these complex business decisions might be difficult to fully appreciate without a background in corporate management. Rest assured the board and executive team are acting in shareholders' best interests." Thompson, unable to contain himself, added loudly, "Perhaps Mr. Ray should focus on his own job rather than second-guessing executives with decades of experience and advanced degrees. How many shares did you say you owned, sir? 5? 10? A few executives chuckled, though most shareholders looked uncomfortable at the naked condescension. I remained calm. "I believe in investing in what you know, Mr. Thompson, and after 15 years of working in your offices, I know Vertex Technologies quite well." Before Thompson could respond, the doors at the back of the ballroom opened and a woman in a crisp business suit entered, followed by 4 men carrying document boxes. She walked confidently to the front of the room and handed Warner an envelope. "What's this?" he asked, irritation clear in his voice at the interruption. "Regulatory filing," she replied loud enough for everyone to hear. Sierra Vista Partners has acquired 40% of Vertex Technologies' outstanding shares from the founders' family trusts. Combined with their existing holdings, they now control 58.7% of the company. Warner's face went pale. "That's impossible. The board has first right of refusal on the founders' shares. This transaction cannot be valid." The board's right of first refusal expired 60 days after the initial offer. The woman, who I knew was Patricia Alvarez, one of the most respected corporate attorneys in the city, continued. "That deadline passed 2 weeks ago. The transaction is complete and legally binding." Murmurs spread through the room as shareholders tried to process this dramatic development. Warner looked like he might be ill. Who is Sierra Vista Partners?" he finally managed. Ms. Alvarez smiled slightly. "Their managing partner is present and would like to address the shareholders." All eyes scanned the room, expecting someone to stand up from among the institutional investors, or perhaps for someone new to enter dramatically. Instead, I stood up quietly from my seat in the back row. "I am Manuel Reyes, managing partner of Sierra Vista Partners and the new majority shareholder of Vertex Technologies." The silence that followed was absolute. Warner's mouth literally hung open. Thompson looked like he'd been struck. Several other executives who had laughed at me earlier stared in undisguised shock. I walked calmly to the front of the room. "Thank you, Ms. Alvarez, and thank you, Mr. Warner, for chairing the meeting until now. As the representative of the majority shareholder, I'll be taking over." This is preposterous," Warner sputtered. "You're the janitor." I smiled. I was the janitor. I'm also an MBA graduate, a long-term investor, and now the controlling shareholder of this company. Turning to address the room, I continued. "For 15 years, I've watched this company grow from within. I've seen its strengths and its weaknesses from a perspective few others could. I've witnessed brilliant innovations dismissed because they came from lower-level employees. I've seen wasteful spending justified as executive necessity." I gestured to the document boxes Ms. Alvarez's team had brought in. "These contain our detailed analysis of Vertex's current position and our plan to restore its competitive edge and shareholder value. Key elements include refocusing on R&D, implementing a more equitable compensation structure, and creating pathways for internal talent development." The institutional investors were already flipping through copies of the plan that were being distributed. Several were nodding with approval at what they read. As my first act as majority shareholder, I continued. "I move for the immediate restructuring of the board of directors and executive team." A hand went up. Martin Klein from Perimeter Capital, one of our largest institutional investors. "Mr. Reyes, while this is certainly unexpected, your analysis is quite thorough." Perimeter Capital seconds the motion. Warner, finally recovering his voice, interjected frantically. "This is a hostile takeover. You can't just walk in here and—" "It's not hostile, Mr. Warner," I corrected him calmly. "It's capitalism. The very system you've explained to shareholders for years when justifying your compensation packages and cost-cutting measures. The majority shareholder is exercising its rights." Thompson, still processing his new reality, hissed, "You tricked us. You pretended to be just a janitor all these years." I turned to face him directly. "I never pretended to be anything, Mr. Thompson. I was a janitor. I did my job with pride and dignity. You and others simply decided that meant I couldn't be anything else. Couldn't be educated, couldn't be ambitious, couldn't be an investor. That was your mistake, not my deception." The vote to restructure the board passed overwhelmingly. Warner, Thompson, and 3 other executives were removed from their positions, effective immediately. I appointed an interim CEO, Dr. Sophia Chen, our brilliant but overlooked head of product development who had been considering leaving for a competitor. As the meeting concluded and shell-shocked executives filed out, many shareholders came forward to introduce themselves. Some admitted they'd seen me for years but never said hello. Others expressed enthusiasm for the new direction outlined in our plan. Warner was the last to leave, stopping in front of me with a mix of anger and bewilderment. 15 years, he said. "You cleaned my office for 15 years without saying a word about any of this." "I spoke up many times, Mr. Warner," I replied. "I submitted suggestions to the employee portal. I raised concerns during town halls. Once, I even sent a detailed analysis of our product vulnerabilities compared to competitors. You just never listened because of who you thought I was. He shook his head and walked out without another word. Later that evening, I returned to the Vertex offices, not to clean, but to meet with the interim leadership team. As I walked through the familiar hallways, now as the majority owner rather than the night janitor, employees stopped and stared. News had spread quickly. Maria from accounting, who had always smiled and said hello when others didn't, approached tentatively. "Mr. Reyes, is it true?" I smiled. "Please, it's still Manuel. But you own the company now?" "Sierra Vista Partners does," I clarified. "It represents investments from many people who believe in Vertex's potential, including several from our community." Her eyes widened. "Our community, you mean?" I nodded. "Many immigrants like us have been investing quietly for years. We see value where others don't because we've had to." In the coming weeks, Vertex Technologies underwent a transformation. We implemented a flatter management structure, redirected funds from excessive executive compensation to R&D, and launched an employee stock ownership program giving everyone, from developers to, yes, janitorial staff, a direct stake in the company's success. Most meaningfully, we established the Visible Innovation Program, creating dedicated channels for employees at all levels to contribute ideas. The program's motto, "Brilliance has no job title." 6 months later, Vertex released its most significant software update in years, incorporating several features developed by previously overlooked employees. Customer satisfaction scores began to climb. The stock price, stagnant for so long, rose 47% in the first quarter after the changes. As for me, I maintained my position as chairman of the board, but declined any executive role. My strength was in observation and long-term thinking, not day-to-day management. Dr. Chen excelled as CEO, bringing technical excellence and human understanding to the role. I still live in the same modest home, though I've paid off the mortgage. I drive the same 10-year-old car. Old habits of frugality die hard, and I've learned that true wealth isn't about displaying status, but about creating security and opportunity. Warner, I heard, took a position with a smaller competitor at half his previous salary. Thompson started a consulting business that struggled to attract clients. Several other former executives reached out about returning to Vertex, suddenly remembering my invaluable contributions to company culture. 1 year after the shareholders' meeting, we held a company-wide celebration of Vertex revitalization. Standing on the stage, looking out at employees from every department and level, I shared the lesson that had guided my journey. Success isn't about who speaks the loudest or sits in the biggest office, I told them. It's about who observes the most carefully, who invests, not just money, but time and attention, most wisely, and who recognizes value where others see only function. After the applause died down, a young woman from the maintenance staff approached me hesitantly. "Mr. Reyes, your story has inspired me," she said. "I'm studying computer science at night, but I wasn't going to tell anyone here because..." She trailed off. "Because you were afraid they'd only see your uniform, not your potential," I finished for her. She nodded. "What's your name?" I asked. "Gabriela Diaz." I smiled. "Well, Gabriela Diaz, I look forward to seeing your application to our developer internship program. And in the meantime, I suggest you start investing in the company, even if it's just a small amount at first." She looked surprised. "You think that's a good idea?" "The best investors," I told her, "are those who see the company from angles others miss. And sometimes the most valuable perspective is from the ground up." As she walked away with new confidence in her step, I thought about how much had changed in a year. Vertex Technologies was thriving not because I had taken control, but because we had finally tapped into the full potential of everyone who worked there, recognizing that brilliance, ambition, and insight can be found at every level of an organization, often hiding in plain sight. The executives had laughed at the janitor investor with his pathetic holdings. They never realized that while they were focused on their quarterly bonuses and corner offices, I was building something far more meaningful. A coalition of overlooked people who recognized value where others saw none. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room isn't the one making the most noise, but the quiet one observing from the corner, perhaps even the one emptying the trash bins after everyone else has gone home.
It happened just after dessert. when the laughter was still lingering and the candles had burned low. Dad, Robert Carter, rose from his chair, cleared his throat, and said in a voice that didn't quite match the warm glow of the room, "After what you've done, Elise, we can't have you here anymore." No one looked at me. Forks clattered awkwardly against plates. Someone shifted in their seat. Maybe Aunt Maggie Dwyer, maybe Trevor. I waited for someone to laugh, to say it was a joke, a misunderstanding, a slip of the tongue. But the only answer was the suitcase by the door. And worse, the empty space on the living room wall where Grandpa's favorite photograph used to hang. The one of him and me standing on the front porch with our fishing rods, smiling like the world had no edges. Gone. Just like that. "We think it's best you go quietly," Maggie added, folding her napkin with sharp, deliberate fingers. "It's better for everyone this way." I stood there, hands trembling, but only slightly, because dignity was the only thing I had left. And then I felt a small hand tug at mine. It was Sophie, my niece, her big brown eyes wide with confusion. "But you didn't mean to hurt anyone, right?" she whispered, her voice small enough that maybe no one else heard. I squeezed her hand once, gently, before someone, probably her mother, pulled her away. No screaming. No pleading, no grand speeches, just the sound of my own heartbeat thudding in my ears as I picked up the suitcase and stepped into the cold night air. Behind me, the door clicked shut. Locked. Final. The stars above were silent witnesses. I left, carrying nothing but a suitcase, and a question that no one dared to answer. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a single text from Sophie. "Stay away. It's bigger than you think." No explanation, no apology. Just a warning that settled into my chest like a stone. I spent that day moving through a world that no longer seemed to fit. The coffee shop I used to visit with Mom, the barista didn't recognize me. The grocery store where Grandpa used to joke about my poor choice in cereal. Nobody smiled back. By afternoon, I made one last mistake. I called Aunt Maggie. I thought maybe there was a version of this story where she would pick up and explain. Instead, the call went straight to voicemail. Blocked. Later that evening, I found myself sitting in my car outside Mom's house, rehearsing what to say. A simple question, nothing more, just, why? When she opened the door, I caught a glimpse inside. The family portrait still hung above the fireplace, but now, a gap where my face had once been. Photos rearranged. History edited with the precision of a scalpel. We stood there, two strangers separated by an open door. "You were always different," Mom said at last, her voice soft, almost rehearsed. "Maybe it's better this way." I didn't answer. There was nothing to say that wouldn't cheapen the silence. That night, scrolling through old texts, I noticed something I hadn't before. Trevor had sent a message weeks ago, buried under the flood of family group chats. Not everyone's on their side. No punctuation, no explanation, just enough to keep a spark alive where everything else had gone cold. Someone knew the truth. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they just needed me to find the rest of the story first. The erasure wasn't complete. Not yet. It took 3 weeks before a crack appeared. A brown envelope, left without a note, slid through the mail slot of my tiny apartment. Inside was a flash drive. No sender, no instructions. Against my better judgment, I plugged it into my laptop. One audio file, 17 minutes, muffled voices, static between words. At first, it was nothing, just the clatter of dishes, the hum of background conversation. Then a voice I knew too well. "Maggie Dwyer. We can't trust Elise with something that valuable. You saw what happened before." Another voice. Dad's, rougher, less certain. "She's still family." Maggie cut him off sharply. "Family doesn't betray blood. Grandpa's house needs to stay with us, not with someone who'd sell it off to the highest bidder." There it was. The lie, planted neatly, watered with just enough doubt to grow, except there had never been a sale. No betrayal. Just whispered poison, spreading while I was too busy trusting. The recording ended before any names were mentioned. No direct orders, no clear conspiracy, just enough to prove what I had feared. The story had been crafted, deliberate and slow, until it hardened into truth. But it wasn't just Maggie's voice that caught my attention. In the background, faint but there, I heard Trevor Dwyer laughing softly at something. He wasn't an innocent bystander. He was part of it. And if Trevor was in on it, then the stakes weren't just sentimental. They were financial. A house tied to Grandpa's estate wasn't just a family relic. It was prime real estate in a town climbing in value every year. Whoever controlled the narrative controlled the inheritance and the future. I sat back in my chair, the room spinning, slightly. They hadn't just pushed me out of their hearts. They had pushed me out of the legacy Grandpa wanted me to protect. And the worst part was, they almost succeeded. 2 days later, I found the final piece of the puzzle tucked away in the county archives, an official copy of Grandpa's will. Neat, notarized, binding, and tucked into the fine print, almost invisible to an untrained eye, a clause: primary residence to be transferred to the family line deemed most responsible for maintaining family tradition and stability. No name, no direct inheritance, just a vague, weaponizable sentence, waiting for someone ambitious enough to twist it, someone like Maggie Dwyer. I flipped through the accompanying documents, my fingers steady even as my stomach churned. Maggie hadn't just accused me of betrayal to protect Grandpa's memory. She had done it because the house was her last chance at mattering. It wasn't about money, not really. It was about standing on that porch, hosting holiday dinners, claiming the Carter legacy as her own, and she wasn't working alone. Further, back in the file was a notarized statement, filed by Trevor Dwyer, citing concerns over my alleged history of irresponsibility and absence from family affairs. A calculated move to paint me as unstable, unreliable, someone unfit to carry on the Carter name. Trevor stood to gain too. Maggie would get the house. Trevor would secure the investments Grandpa left behind, accounts tied to the properties, i.e., deed, accounts no one had bothered to mention. The betrayal was bigger than I'd imagined. It wasn't about one house. It was about control, status, and legacy. The worst part? They hadn't even needed real evidence. Just enough whispered doubt to plant the idea, and enough silence from the rest of the family to let it grow. As I left, the courthouse, the late autumn wind sharp against my face, I knew one thing with a clarity that stunned me. They had fought to erase me, to rewrite me as the villain in their story, but they forgot one simple rule. I knew how to read the fine print, and I wasn't done yet. The first step was simple: disappear in plain sight. I stopped showing up where they could see me. No more grocery store runs at familiar places. No more lingering glances at the house on Willow Creek Lane. Instead, I enrolled in night classes. Real estate law, probate court procedures, property acquisition strategies. I sat quietly at the back of classrooms filled with eager 20-somethings, taking notes by hand like it was my only lifeline. Meanwhile, I watched and waited. Through public records, I confirmed what I had suspected. The taxes on Grandpa's house hadn't been paid in nearly 3 years. Maggie and Trevor had fought so hard to claim the home, but in their arrogance, they forgot the most basic rule. Ownership isn't just about blood, it's about paperwork. A foreclosure notice was inevitable. I started gathering funds quietly. Sold off old jewelry, picked up extra shifts, took consulting work under a different name. The money grew slowly, then steadily. Still, a shadow loomed. There was an option. One of the professors mentioned it offhand one evening, a loophole involving property liens and early bidding at pre-foreclosure auctions. It wasn't illegal, but it wasn't exactly something you bragged about at Thanksgiving, either. If I moved first, I could secure the property before it ever hit public auction. I could own it outright, and legally, before Maggie even realized it was slipping through her fingers. It would be quiet, clean, brutal, but it would mean stepping into the same world of technicalities and silent moves they had used against me. I spent a week agonizing over the decision. Every time doubt crept in, I pictured Grandpa's laugh, the way his hand ruffled my hair when I came home from college. He hadn't cared about titles or technicalities. He had cared about heart, and I remembered Mom's face that night at the door, so calm, so certain, as she erased me with a few soft-spoken words. They had made their choice. Now I was making mine. The paperwork was filed 2 days later. By the time they would realize what had happened, it would be far too late. 3 months later, the invitations went out. Celebration of Heritage, the glossy cards read, complete with a picture of Grandpa's house bathed in sunset light. It was Trevor's idea, a symbolic gesture to honor family traditions by officially passing the house into his name. Of course, the family hadn't paid the back taxes. Of course, the foreclosure process had continued quietly behind the scenes. Of course, they had no idea that the house had already changed hands. I drove by the day of the party, slowing just enough to watch the guests gather. Balloons bobbed lazily against the porch railings. Cousins I hadn't seen in years milled about the lawn, balancing paper plates piled high with potluck casseroles and store-bought pies. From across the street, I spotted Maggie, her smile broad but brittle, moving from group to group like a politician, at a fundraiser. She wore Grandpa's old watch on her wrist, the one he said he'd leave to me one day. It looked out of place, gleaming and stiff against her skin. At the edge of the yard, near the rose bushes, Robert Carter and Trevor stood locked in a quiet but heated conversation. Even from a distance, the tension was visible, the tight fists, the clipped gestures. It wasn't about family. It was about control. I stayed hidden behind the wheel, sunglasses on, window cracked just enough to catch the sound of distant laughter. At some point, Mrs. Lillian Brooks, the old neighbor, shuffled past my car. She paused, squinting through the windshield. Recognition flickered across her face, but she said nothing. Just tipped her head slightly, the barest nod, before moving on. Maybe she knew. Maybe she understood that sometimes you have to lose everything you thought mattered before you can reclaim what truly does. The sun dipped lower. Music spilled from the open windows, mixing with the sharp scent of barbecue and cut grass. The house stood proudly in the center of it all, dressed up and polished, as if it belonged to the people who had abandoned its true heart long ago. They thought they had won. They thought they were celebrating permanence. But underneath the fresh paint and the borrowed memories, the ground was already shifting, and by the time the first toast was raised, there would be no ground left to stand on. I didn't wait for the speeches to end. I parked 2 blocks away, walking the rest of the distance with my head high, papers tucked neatly inside a simple leather folder. The house glowed under the porch lights, laughter spilling down the front, steps like a waterfall too bright, too loud. As I stepped onto the front lawn, a woman at the door, maybe a second cousin, maybe a new girlfriend, caught sight of me and waved. "Deliveries around back," she called out, her voice cheerful, oblivious. For a moment, the universe held its breath. I kept walking, slow and deliberate, my heels crunching the gravel as I approached the porch. Inside, Maggie clinked her glass against Trevor's, raising a toast so loud even the neighbors probably heard her. To family, to legacy, to the next generation of Carters. She didn't notice me at first. Neither did Trevor, grinning like a boy who had just won a prize he didn't earn. It wasn't until Robert Carter turned toward the door, old instincts sharper than pride, that the party stilled. He stiffened, one hand still curled around his drink. Maggie's smile faltered. "Elise?" she croaked, the name scraping out like it hurt her throat. I stepped fully inside now, the cool air of the house wrapping around me like an old familiar coat. Beside me, James Whitmore, calm and composed as ever, unsnapped the folder, pulling out a single heavy document. I didn't speak, didn't smile, didn't explain, just let the deed hang there between us, undeniable and final. Trevor blinked once, then twice, like a man realizing too late that the bridge under him was already burning. The silence spread across the room, brittle and absolute. For one heartbeat, everything they had built on lies and assumptions trembled, and then it began to crack. The room didn't explode. It crumbled. Maggie was the first to recover, lunging toward the folder in James's hand, her voice sharp, desperate. This isn't valid. There's a clause. Grandpa's will. It names our side of the family. She fumbled in her purse, pulling out a crumpled copy of the old will like a magician unveiling a trick already spoiled. James didn't flinch. He calmly produced another document, stamped, signed, recorded at the county office 2 months prior. That clause only applies if taxes and upkeep are maintained, he said, voice low, almost apologetic. They weren't. The property entered foreclosure. Ms. Carter acquired it legally through preemptive rights. A few cousins gasped softly. Someone dropped a plate. Trevor opened his mouth, searching for words, but nothing came out. Across the room, Dad, Robert Carter, set down his drink with slow, deliberate care. He didn't argue. Didn't ask questions. He just looked at me. And in that look, I saw everything he never said the night they locked the door behind me. Regret, shame, recognition. For a long moment, no one moved. The house, so carefully polished for their celebration, seemed to shrink around them, the peeling paint at the windowsill, the hairline cracks in the ceiling, all suddenly impossible to ignore. Maggie's hand dropped to her side. Trevor muttered something under his breath and turned away. The fight drained out of them faster than I expected. Maybe deep down they had always known. Maybe they understood, too late, that true ownership isn't declared by speeches or family. Trees. It's written in the quiet, patient hands that hold steady when everyone else lets go. I stood there a moment longer, letting the silence finish what my words never could. Then I turned toward the door, the folder tucked under my arm, leaving them to sort through the wreckage themselves. I was halfway down the driveway when I heard footsteps behind me. Elise, wait! It was Sophie, no longer the little girl clutching my hand at the dinner table, but still carrying the same flicker of hope in her voice. She caught up to me, breathless, her hands twisting the hem of her dress. I'm sorry, she said, eyes shining. We didn't all believe them. Not really. I looked at her for a long moment. At the fear, the guilt, the fragile kindness trying to survive in a house that had taught her otherwise. I didn't say anything. Some things don't need to be forgiven out loud. From my pocket, I pulled out a small object, a tarnished brass key tied to a fraying piece of red string. Grandpa's spare key, the one he had pressed into my palm the summer I left for college. Crossed the lawn, past the sagging porch steps, and tucked the key carefully under the welcome mat, not because I expected to return. Not because they deserved it, but because some memories deserve to be left in the soil where they were born, not uprooted and dragged into new battles. Sophie watched silently, tears slipping down her cheeks. I gave her a nod, small, steady, then turned away without looking back. The night had deepened, folding the house into shadow. As I reached the street, I allowed myself one last glance over my shoulder. The house stood where it always had. But it felt different now. Hollow, unfinished, like a story missing its ending. Not every scar fades. Some simply grow quieter with time, and some goodbyes echo longer than the words themselves ever could.
He wasn't calling for help, he was calling for me. I was halfway through my midnight shift at the hospice center when the call came in. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something instinct maybe made me pick up. Is this Miss Hartwell? The voice was cautious, almost apologetic. Yes, who's calling? This is Nurse Angela from Clayton County Hospital. I'm calling about your father. My stomach turned cold. I don't. He was admitted 2 hours ago, stroke. He's stable for now, but he's not responsive. He's been repeating one name. Yours. I said nothing. My fingers clenched to the edge of the nurse's desk. There's no one else listed on his emergency contact form. She continued gently. Only you. First and last name. Handwritten. I hadn't spoken to my father in 15 years. Not since the night he stood on the porch of our house in Willow Creek, Georgia, and told me I wasn't his daughter, that I should leave, that I shouldn't come back. And I didn't. Until now, I drove through the empty back roads of South Georgia in silence. No radio, no music, just the hum of old tires and the whisper of pine trees lining the 2-lane highway. Willow Creek looked the same and yet smaller. The white courthouse dome still gleamed under the streetlights. The bakery on Main Street still had the same flickering neon open sign. The old Baptist church still stood tall and solemn like a judge who never forgot. And me, I was the ghost returning to a town that had buried me alive. The hospital sat off a quiet stretch of Route 9 next to the Dollar General and across from what used to be Miller and Boyd construction. Now it was just an overgrown lot fence, rusting silence, thick. Nurse Angela met me at the ICU doors. He's in room 207. He's mostly unconscious, but he knew you were coming. I didn't say I was, I replied. She hesitated, then handed me a small clear bag of his personal effects. A cracked wallet, a pen. One photo, I recognized it instantly. Me age. 11, sitting on his shoulders laughing at the Willow Creek Harvest Festival. Behind us, the old church banner that read Psalm 55:22. Cast your burden upon the Lord, and he shall sustain you. There was a small red circle drawn around the verse, hand-pinned, faint, deliberate. I stared at it. When I stepped into room 207, I didn't know what I expected. He looked smaller than I remembered, thinner. Older, of course, but not in the way that time ages you, in the way that guilt does. His eyes were closed, but as I approached, they fluttered open, just slightly. And then he saw me. His lips didn't move, his hand didn't twitch, but his eyes. They filled, not with tears, not even with apology, with urgency, like someone who knows they're dying and hasn't finished what they came to do, like someone who still held a secret between clenched teeth. I didn't speak, I just sat and waited, because if he had sent for me after everything, it wasn't out of regret. It was a summons. He once told me I didn't belong. But now, in the place where voices fade and truths remain, he'd called me back, and I knew he wasn't done. Not with me, not with what he buried. I wasn't abandoned. I was discarded. There's a difference between being left behind and being erased. When someone leaves you, there's usually a trace, a note, a slammed door, the echo of footsteps that once meant something. But when my father erased me, it was like I'd never existed at all. I was 17, the summer before senior year. I still remember the sound of the screen door slapping behind me as I stood on the porch, suitcase in one hand, scholarship papers in the other. He didn't yell, he didn't cry. He just stood there, arms crossed, jaw locked, and said, "You're not my daughter, and I need you to leave this house." Now I laughed at first. Thought he was joking. Then I saw the way he looked at me like I was a stain he couldn't scrub out. That night, I slept in my car behind the First Baptist Church, parked between two trash bins and a youth group bus with a flat tire. By morning, I was gone, but even before that night, there were signs. I was maybe 10 when the first man in a suit came by the house. He wore cologne, too strong for Willow Creek, and carried a briefcase, too nice for county business. He didn't stay long, just enough time for a whisper argument in the kitchen and the sound of paper being torn. I asked my mom who he was. She said, "A man your daddy should have never worked for." A week later, she was gone, went to stay with her sister in Alabama. Dad said, no forwarding address, no goodbye. Just her scent left on the flannel robe behind the door. After she left, everything tightened. He started locking his study door, stopped attending church, started burning things in the fireplace, not logs but files. One night, I saw him clutching a ledger and whispering Psalm 55 over and over like it was the only thing keeping him upright. I didn't understand. Then I was just a kid who liked drawing and sneaking moon pies out of the pantry. But now, sitting beside his hospital bed 15 years later, I couldn't unsee it. He didn't throw me out because I failed him. He threw me out because I saw too much, because I asked the wrong questions, because someone needed me gone. And now I was back. But this time I wasn't the girl with a suitcase and a scholarship. I was a woman with eyes wide open. And he, the man who erased me, had called me to bear witness to whatever he couldn't say out loud. They thought I would disappear when they cut me out, but I didn't vanish. I became quieter, sharper, and I carried the one thing they forgot to destroy, the truth. I left the town, but I never left the truth. I never told anyone what happened in Willow Creek. Not the woman who hired me to clean motel rooms off I-16. Not the night manager at the Waffle House where I pulled doubles for tips. Not even the hospice supervisor who handed me my first uniform and said, "You've got calm hands. Patients will like you." I didn't tell them that my father had thrown me out. I didn't explain why I had no family listed on my emergency forms. I just kept my head down, showed up early, stayed late, and learned how to listen without flinching when people died. There's something about hospice care that teaches you how to disappear. The silence, the waiting, the final goodbyes that come without fanfare. It suited me. No one asked questions. No one needed to know my name meant anything back in Willow Creek. But still, there was one thing I kept. Tucked between the pages of a battered notebook I carried from job to job, the photo I must have looked at it 100 times over the years. Me, 11 years old, sitting on my father's shoulders, the golden leaves of October swirling behind us. The Willow Creek Harvest Festival. You could see the booths in the background, lemonade stands, handmade quilts, the church bake sale table my mom used to run. I was smiling like the world was whole, and he was smiling back. For a long time, I used that picture to convince myself I hadn't imagined the good parts, that there was once a version of him who loved me before the silence, before the exile. But then one day, I noticed something. On the back of the photo, beneath the smudged date and faded ink, someone had written a verse, Psalm 55:22. The same one I found, circled in red in his wallet the night I arrived at the hospital. Cast your burden upon the Lord, and he shall sustain you. I didn't know whether it was a prayer or a confession, but I knew one thing. It wasn't written for him. It was meant for me. In all those years, I didn't try to contact him. I didn't return to Willow Creek for holidays or funerals or old neighbors' birthdays. I let the town forget me, let them rewrite the family name without me in it. But I didn't stop living. I paid my rent, took care of my patients, held the hands of strangers while they took their last breaths. I sent half my paycheck to an old friend's daughter when she got pregnant at 19. I kept a drawer of letters. I never sent some addressed to Dad, most addressed to no one. I didn't need revenge. I didn't want pity. I just wanted a life that was mine, built from silence, stitched with small kindnesses, and solid enough that no one could take it from me again. And now, after 15 years of quiet, I was back in Willow Creek, not because I missed it, but because the man who erased me had left me a message, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to decide who I really was. They buried me to protect their name. Now they want me to stay gone. The ICU waiting room smelled like reheated coffee and worn-out upholstery. A Reader's Digest from 3 years ago sat curled open on the end table. Its cover faded from time and idle hands. On the wall hung a bulletin board full of smiling faces. Local church drives, bake sales, a harvest festival flyer stapled over a prayer circle announcement. Willow Creek hadn't changed. It just aged in place. I stepped inside and the air tightened like a door had slammed behind me. He was already there. William Hartwell, my uncle. My father's older brother and the self-declared gatekeeper of the family name. I hadn't seen him since I was 16 the day he told me, "Your father's not the kind of man who forgives mistakes. Best not make a second one by staying." He stood now by the vending machine, arms folded across his crisp blue dealership shirt, the kind with his name stitched in red thread over the chest. His mouth flattened the second he saw me. "Well, look who wandered back." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It carried the weight of someone used to being listened to. "We didn't think you'd show." "You weren't invited." "I was called," I said simply. He scoffed. "Don't flatter yourself." He was confused. "Stroke messes with the brain. He probably thought you were someone else." I said nothing. A voice behind me cut in. Softer. Slower. "She's not someone else. Will I turned Uncle Thomas?" He looked older than I remembered, gray streaking his temples, eyes a little more tired, collar of his preacher's shirt slightly wilted, but his gaze held mine with something close to recognition. Maybe even regret. "She's the only name he wrote down," Thomas said, quiet but firm. "It's her signature the hospital's waiting on. Not yours." William's jaw flexed. He took a step closer. "You don't belong here," he said. "You left. You broke your father's heart. You didn't even come back when your mother passed." "She was already gone," I replied. "Long before she left this world. And you know that." He shook his head like swatting a fly. "You show up now thinking you have a right to what? Closure, forgiveness. You're 15 years too late." I didn't speak. Instead, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the photo. I handed it to him face up. He didn't take it at first. just stared me on my father's shoulders, both of us smiling beneath the harvest banner, the same photo I found in Dad's wallet, the same one I had carried through every motel, every shift, every quiet year I wasn't supposed to exist. I flipped it over. Let him see the red circle around the scripture, the faint writing, Psalm 55. He kept this, I said. 15 years, folded, protected. When everything else was gone, this is what he had in his wallet. William's face froze. His hand dropped. I turned to Thomas. What does Psalm 55 mean to you? Thomas swallowed hard. His voice caught just slightly. It means some burdens are too heavy to carry alone. I looked at both of them. William wouldn't meet my eyes. Thomas did, but his were full of something he wasn't ready to say yet. I put the photo back in my coat. If I don't belong here, then explain that. No one did. I walked past them down the hallway toward room 207. They didn't stop me, because deep down they knew. They hadn't just erased me to protect my father. They erased me to protect themselves. The truth wasn't hidden. It was sealed under the pulpit. The church was exactly as I remembered. White clapboard walls, stained glass windows faded by decades of sun, and a steeple that seemed too tall for such a small town. First Baptist Willow Creek had stood at the center of this place longer than most of the families who lived here, including mine. Thomas met me at the back entrance just after sunrise. He didn't ask why I was there. He just opened the door and stepped aside. Inside, it smelled like lemon oil and old hymnals. I hadn't set foot in this building since I was a girl. Since the day I helped my father hang that same harvest banner in the fellowship hall. The memory stung not with pain, but with clarity. He hadn't always been cold. Something changed him, or someone. Thomas walked ahead of me past the sanctuary toward the narrow door that led to the basement. He held it open and we descended in silence. The concrete steps creaked beneath our feet. At the bottom, beneath rows of unused folding chairs and dust-covered Sunday school props, stood an old bookshelf. He reached toward the back, pulled out a cracked leather Bible, King James Version heavy with age and reverence. He placed it on the folding table between us and flipped slowly, almost unwillingly, to the bookmarked page, Psalm 55. Tucked beneath the page was an envelope, yellowed, sealed with wax that had long since crumbled. My name was written across the front in my father's handwriting, the same way it appeared on hospital records. Sharp pressed too hard into the page. I looked up at Thomas. I was supposed to give it to you when the time came, he said softly. But I waited. Why he didn't answer? Not with words. His shoulders fell, his gaze dropped, and I understood. Because silence was safer, because the town needed him to be the preacher, not the brother who knew too much. I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter handwritten uneven. Not a confession, not quite, more like a trail of pieces he hoped I would follow. He wrote about Miller and Boyd Construction, the company that used to sponsor the town's summer picnic and renovate the courthouse for free. He had been their accountant, trusted quiet, the perfect man to sign off on financials that didn't add up. But then the ledgers started whispering. Money missing. Grants shifted. Political donations disguised as building contracts. He said he tried to report it once anonymously, but they found out and they threatened him, not with violence, with exposure, with ruin, and with me. He wrote, They said if I didn't make you disappear from the picture, they'd make it permanent. I felt the air leave my lungs. Carla, his former secretary, had altered records, erased my name from accounts William had arranged. The silence told the town I'd left on my own, rebellious and unstable. Thomas had kept the letter too afraid of what might happen if the truth got out. He wrote, I failed you to protect you, but the cost, I paid it every day, every Sunday, every time I looked in the mirror and saw a father who traded his child for his name, at the bottom of the page, barely legible. If she comes, give her the Bible. Let her choose what to do with the truth. I no longer can. I stood there for a long moment, the paper trembling in my hands. He hadn't asked for forgiveness, he hadn't even apologized, but he had left me the one thing he never gave anyone else. The last word I didn't need to be claimed. I needed to be remembered. The hospital was quiet when I returned that evening, the kind of quiet that sinks into your skin. Not peaceful, just still. The fluorescent lights hummed low and the hallway smelled faintly of antiseptic and burnt coffee. I stepped into room 207 one last time. He was still there, breathing slow and shallow, body thinner than it had any right to be. His eyes were closed. Whether he was unconscious or just unwilling to face me again, I didn't know. I didn't ask. I placed the Bible on the table next to his bed, opened to Psalm 55, the letter still tucked neatly inside. Then I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the photo, the same one he had carried for 15 years, the same one William couldn't explain. I flipped it over and wrote something new on the back. Not for him, not really. Just 3 words. I remember everything. I left it beside his hand. Not for reconciliation, not for guilt, for recognition. So that when the nurse came in to check his vitals, or when Carla wandered in pretending she still had a place here, or when William returned to assert control, they would all see it, and they would all know that the girl they erased was never gone. She had just been watching, waiting, and now she had come back. Not for a seat at the table, but to burn the guest list. I didn't say goodbye. He didn't deserve it. Outside, the air had that Georgia weight to it, thick with the smell of pine pavement and the coming rain. I walked past the chapel, past the coffee machine that never worked, past the bulletin board where someone had pinned a flyer for this year's Harvest Festival. It hadn't changed in all these years. Same pumpkin font, same sponsors. Miller and Boyd wasn't on it this time. I allowed myself a small smile. In the parking lot, I opened my car door just as a sedan pulled up behind me. Neutral gray. No plates I recognized. The window rolled down. A young man stepped out mid-30s, crisp suit, legal pad in hand. "Ms. Hartwell," he asked. I turned slowly. Depends on who's asking. "I'm with Pine and Miller. Legal group, I represent a trust connected to the Willow Creek Community Development Foundation. There's been a motion to transfer ownership of a parcel of land. Your name appears on the original purchase file. We need your signature or your contest." I raised an eyebrow. "Someone's contesting it," I asked. "Yes, a family member. Claims you were added without consent." Of course they were. I took the pen he offered, signed where he pointed, and as I handed the clipboard back, I said, "Tell them I didn't come back for the land. I came back to make sure no one lies about who I was ever again." He nodded, got back in the car. I watched the taillights fade into the dark. Then I climbed into my own car. No tears, no music, just my breath steady and full. For the first time in 15 years, I wasn't carrying the weight of being forgotten. They would remember me now, not because I screamed, not because I begged, but because I left behind the one thing they couldn't destroy: the truth. Did this story echo something you've lived through or something you've witnessed in silence? Tell us in the comments. Your voice might be the one someone else needs to hear. If this story moved you, like and share to keep the truth alive for those who were forgotten and those who fought to exist again.